A gray drizzle hung over downtown Vancouver as morning traffic hissed past Kingston Elite Motors. Inside, the air smelled of leather and money. A man in a worn jacket stepped through the glass doors, his jeans faded, his hands rough. "Sir, this area's for real buyers," a salesman said sharply, blocking his way. Another laughed. "You can try the used lot down the street." The man's eyes stayed calm, but something behind them flickered, disappointment, not anger. No one in that showroom knew they'd just mocked Edward King, the man who owned the dealership, the brand, and everything they stood on. That single moment would flip their perfect world upside down. Stay until the end, this story will make you rethink what power truly looks like. Subscribe now to Canada's Heartfelt Tales for stories that prove respect is the real luxury. The rain didn't stop that day. It fell in steady curtains across Vancouver's downtown core, washing over the sleek sign of Kingston Elite Motors until it shimmered like silver glass. Inside, salesmen paced between the polished cars, their laughter sharp, their words slick as oil. The scent of wax and coffee hung heavy in the air. And in that space of power and polish, arrogance had become the new language of service. Edward King stood under the awning across the street, the hood of his jacket dripping with rain. The reflection of his own dealership stared back at him through the puddles, his empire of chrome and pride. For years, he'd built it from scratch, believing excellence came from discipline. But lately, the whispers had grown louder, customers humiliated for looking poor, staff judging worth by shoes, not sincerity. He had to see it himself. He waited until the showroom lights glowed against the storm, then crossed the street. The automatic doors opened with a hiss. Instantly, the sound inside changed, laughter faded, eyes lifted, and a manager in a sharp gray suit frowned at the man dripping water onto the marble floor. "Sir, this area's for clients," the manager said, his tone polite but cold. "I'm here to buy a car," Edward replied quietly. The man's eyes swept over his clothes, worn denim, old jacket, muddy shoes. "I see," he said with a thin smile. "Then perhaps the used lot on Hastings would be more appropriate." A few employees chuckled near the reception desk. One of them, a tall blonde salesman named Ryan, leaned closer and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe he came in to dry off." The laughter returned. Edward's hands tightened inside his pockets, but his face stayed calm. He turned toward a black luxury SUV gleaming under the ceiling lights. "How much for this one?" he asked. Ryan smirked. "More than you can afford, pal." The words echoed off the glass. For a second, no one breathed. Then the manager clapped his hands lightly, dismissing him. "Let's not waste anyone's time here, sir." Edward nodded once, as if agreeing, then walked toward the door. Behind him, the laughter started again, muffled but cutting. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Every sound in that showroom had already told him what he came to learn. Outside, the rain swallowed his reflection. The next morning, the same doors opened, but this time, the man who walked in wasn't a beggar. Edward wore a charcoal suit, tailored to perfection, his hair slicked back, the Kingston family crest pinned to his lapel. The receptionist straightened immediately. Ryan froze mid-conversation. The manager stumbled over his greeting. "Gee, good morning, sir. We weren't expecting you today." Edward's gaze moved slowly around the room. "I know," he said. "That's why I came." He walked past them, his shoes clicking against the marble floor. The room seemed smaller now, quieter. "Where's the staff meeting room?" he asked. The manager pointed silently. Within minutes, the entire team gathered, some whispering nervously, others pretending calm. When the door shut, Edward turned toward the screen at the front of the room. A single click brought the security footage to life. There he was, the same man they'd thrown out yesterday, standing in their showroom, ignored, mocked, dismissed. The laughter that filled the screen yesterday now fell heavy in the room. No one spoke. Edward let the silence burn before he finally said, "That was me." A murmur rippled across the team. Ryan's face turned pale. The manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "I built this company," Edward continued, his voice steady, "not for cars, not for numbers, but for people. The moment we forget that, we lose everything." He looked directly at Ryan. "You, in particular, seem to have forgotten." Ryan stammered, "Sir, I didn't realize, it was just." "It was arrogance," Edward cut in. "And it ends today." The manager tried to step in, but Edward raised his hand. "Save it." "You laughed too." Then, calm as ever, he handed over 2 envelopes. "You're both done here. Collect your things." No shouting followed, no begging, just the quiet shuffling of guilt. When the door closed behind them, Edward turned to the rest. "The rest of you have a choice. Either remember why we started, or follow them out that door." One voice rose softly from the back. It was Emma Lawson, a young consultant who'd been quiet all morning. "Sir," she said, I spoke to you yesterday. I didn't recognize you, but I tried to help." Edward's expression softened. "I know," he said. "And I haven't forgotten." Weeks passed. The dealership changed like a pulse waking up again. The glossy smiles were gone, in their place came real ones. The tone softened. Staff began greeting everyone, from businessmen to blue-collar workers, with equal respect. Edward watched from the office balcony some days, pretending to review numbers while really watching people rediscover decency. One afternoon, a man in work boots entered the showroom. His clothes were dusty, his hands calloused. The new receptionist greeted him warmly. "Welcome to Kingston Elite Motors. Can I get you a coffee while you browse?" The man looked surprised. "Coffee? Sure." From his office above, Edward smiled faintly. It was working. The arrogance had cracked, and through it came something honest. But not everyone liked the change. One evening, as the staff prepared to close, the former manager stormed in, still in his old suit. "You fired me for one mistake," he barked. "Do you know how long I worked here?" Edward came down the stairs slowly. "Long enough to forget what respect means." "You ruined my career," the man shouted. "Because of one poor fool who walked in dressed like trash." Edward's voice didn't rise. "That poor fool owns the building you're standing in." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut air. The man's anger broke into disbelief, then shame. He lowered his eyes and walked out, the door clicking softly behind him. Months turned into a quiet transformation. Kingston Elite became known not just for its cars, but for the way it treated people. Reviews flooded in, customers praising kindness, fairness, empathy. Sales soared higher than before. The company's culture, once cold and polished, had become human again. Emma Lawson, now promoted to head of client relations, stood beside Edward one evening as the city lights flickered outside. "You changed everything," she said. Edward shook his head. "No. You all did. I just reminded you what mattered." He paused, watching the reflection of the dealership sign glowing across the glass. "Luxury isn't about price tags, Emma. It's about how people feel when they walk through those doors." She nodded quietly. "Then we finally sell the right thing." Edward smiled. "Exactly. But the story didn't end there. One night, a journalist came by, having heard rumors about the owner who disguised himself as a beggar. The interview went viral. The footage of Edward's undercover visit spread across the internet, sparking debates about class, dignity, and decency. People shared their own experiences of being judged by appearance. The company's inbox filled with letters, some angry, most grateful. At a press conference weeks later, Edward stood before reporters, cameras flashing. "If one story can make people look at each other with more kindness," he said, "then every uncomfortable moment was worth it." The applause that followed wasn't for the cars. It was for something bigger. On a quiet Sunday morning months later, Edward parked his old sedan near the same dealership. He liked to visit without notice, just to see if the lessons still lived on. As he walked through the door, a new salesman smiled warmly. "Good morning, sir. Welcome to Kingston Elite. How can I help you today?" Edward chuckled softly. "I was just looking." "Take your time," the salesman replied. "Everyone deserves to explore." The words hung in the air, simple, sincere, and true. For Edward, that was the real reward. Not revenge. Not pride. But knowing the world could change, starting with one act of humility. Outside, the rain began again, gentle this time. The sign above shimmered like it once did, but now its reflection carried something deeper than shine. It carried respect. Yet karma still had one more scene to play. A few months later, Edward learned that Ryan, the salesman who mocked him first, had tried joining another luxury dealership. But word travels fast in this city. No one wanted to hire someone who humiliated a man for being poor. Eventually, Ryan ended up selling used cars out of a small rented lot on the city's edge. One afternoon, as Edward drove past that lot, he saw Ryan standing in the rain, wiping down a dusty sedan. For a brief moment, their eyes met through the glass. Edward didn't smile. He simply nodded, then drove on, quiet justice, calm and complete. Because power, when used right, doesn't shout. It restores. And sometimes, the best revenge is dignity returned. The city never really sleeps, but that night, Vancouver felt different. The streets shimmered after the rain, and through the dealership's glass, Edward watched the reflection of the man he used to be, driven, distant, untouchable. Now, he saw something else in that reflection, peace. The empire still stood, but its heartbeat had changed. People inside laughed softly with customers, not at them. Every handshake carried warmth instead of ego. Edward stepped outside, the cool air brushing his face. A young boy passed by with his father, pointing at the glowing sign. "That's where nice people sell fancy cars," the boy said. The father smiled and nodded. Edward paused, eyes following them until they vanished into the rain. For the first time in years, he felt the weight lift, not from power lost or gained, but from truth finally lived. Because sometimes, the real victory isn't in proving who you are. It's in reminding the world what decency still means. If this story touched you, help it reach more hearts, like, share, and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales, where real stories remind us that respect will always outshine wealth.